Today I want to take you back, not just to a year, but to a feeling. That feeling of walking into a movie or setting yourself down in front of a TV and having absolutely no idea that what you were about to watch was going to stay with you for the rest of your life. That feeling happened a lot in 1982, maybe more than any other year in the history of movies. So today, I'm going to make the case on why 1982 just might be the best year in movie history. So pop that tape in. I got you. Let's go do this. (1982), the greatest year in movie history. Maybe. Over the next couple of months, we are going to dive into some of the most legendary years in all of cinema. 84, 87, 85, 77, 76, 75, 39. Some of the greatest years of all time. And there's a few others in there too. And it's going to be from not only a fan's perspective, which I am a late Gen X kid who grew up with these movies and loved them with all my heart, but I also became a filmmaker, and so there's that objective look we got to put into all of this, and it's all going to come together to craft the most fair argument, the most honest argument possible. But today we're starting with 1982 because it's an easy one to start with. Let's build the case for this great year. All right, so what makes 1982 so much different than some of the other years we're going to talk about over the next couple of months? It makes it a unique case is it is kind of at a collision point in filmmaking and cinema in our entire history. You still had the DNA of 1970s filmmaking that was alive and well. Movies still felt handmade. Directors still took massive swings. Studios still bankrolled weird ideas. Genre movies were allowed to be strange, dark, personal, risky, all of those things. But at the exact same time, the blockbuster era had arrived. Spielberg and Lucas had changed Hollywood. There is no doubt. Movies were getting bigger, more ambitious, more cinematic than ever, and somehow 1982 became the exact moment when those two worlds collided perfectly. You had artistic filmmakers making giant crowd-pleasing films, and you had genre movies being treated with the same seriousness usually reserved for big prestige dramas. That combination is almost impossible now. Today, most blockbuster filmmaking feels designed by a committee, polished, overly smooth, checking every box. But in 1982, it was nothing like that. You could feel the fingerprints of the people making these films, and you could tell how much they loved them, how much craft went into them. Their whole obsessions with horror, practical effects, or a whole vibe of a movie. All of it went into it, including their fears and what they thought might come next. And maybe most importantly, at this point in time and for the next decade or so, movies and Hollywood and the filmmakers all still trusted the audiences. Think about that. Hollywood released Blade Runner as a major studio summer movie. Philosophical noir science film based around mortality and what it means to be human, atmospheric, wet, drenched in neon, melancholy, existential, all of that. And it was a summer tentpole that they were dropping out. And it came out the same summer as E.T., something vastly different, one of the most warm and emotionally family-centered films ever made, maybe. That is tonal range that you just don't see anymore. That's what 1982 had. That's what made it special. Not one style, not one genre, everything simultaneously, all firing at the audience at once. So we talked about E.T. That's a really good place to start. I'm a huge Spielberg fan. Admittedly, he is my favorite director of all time. Partly because of that feeling he gave me then as a kid that has never left. That is what all of Hollywood and filmmaking is supposed to be in my heart. And man, Spielberg nailed it with E.T. There is no doubt. So let me tell you what makes this film so important just beyond the numbers, which we all know are huge for this film, because it is the highest grossing film of the year and of all time at that point. It made $800 million on an $11 million budget. Think about that for a minute. But what makes E.T. a masterpiece has nothing to do with its budget or how much money it made. It captures something movies used to do better than almost anything. It captured a sense of wonder, real wonder, not manufactured nostalgia bait, not corporate remember this type of manipulation. Actual cinematic wonder is what it captured. The bicycling silhouette against the moon, John Williams detonating your emotions with his score, kids actually feeling like real kids in this movie that you knew in real life, a story about loneliness, loss, love, things that you can't hold on to forever. And that's what kind of gets me about this every time. There's a love, a loss, and we can't get back to this time period. And at that time, it was letting us know that that was kind of going to happen. This movie told its story completely, and then it ended. No sequel set up, no post-credits franchise plan, none of that. It just ended. We don't get that anymore. Everything's got to keep something alive, and we miss it every single time we sit down in a theater, because what makes things so beautiful is that they're fleeting, right? They don't last forever. There's not a million more coming. E.T. was beautiful. And then, if you look at me, you know we had to talk about The Thing by John Carpenter, starring Kurt Russell as MacReady. Same summer, you get a completely different alien movie. And yeah, it didn't do that well at the box office, but man, has it found its audience since then. And it comes from 1982, completely different universe than E.T., there's no doubt. And if you were a kid in 1982 and you watched E.T. one weekend and then somehow you saw The Thing right after that, man, that is whiplash on a scale that you haven't experienced before that time. And that tells you at the same time everything 1982 was. Where Spielberg's film is warm and golden and full of hope, Carpenter's film is frozen and paranoid and full of specific terror of not knowing who you can trust and what is going to happen. Antarctic researchers, a shape-shifting alien, and slow creeping realization that anyone standing next to you might already actually be gone, and they might be your enemy. Rob Bottin's practical effects in this are legendary. This film is the benchmark for practical effects. I mean, seriously, as a filmmaker, 40 some odd years later, with unlimited digital tools at people's disposal, unlimited budgets, modern filmmakers, they cannot recreate this. They don't even bother trying. They just put effects on it digitally and move on. Bottin built this physically in 1982. That's not nostalgia talking. That is craft that doesn't exist anymore. But here's what is wild. This movie was brutally reviewed when it was released. Critics hated it. Audiences weren't ready for it. E.T. was in everybody's hearts. And then VHS happened. Another big thing that hit in the early 80s. And generation after generation discovered this film on tape. Late night, lights off, alone, and immediately recognized it is one of the greatest horror films ever made. That's another thing about 1982. These movies lasted, they survived, they grew, and Carpenter's masterpiece is at the top of that list. Full stop, no doubt. And then, of course, we mentioned Blade Runner already, also a box office disappointment when it came out, now a legendary film with an incredible sequel all these years later that had to reach back and grab that 1982 magic and bring it forward to today. Ridley Scott took Philip K. Dick's novel and created this insane visual world. Harrison Ford, famous off Star Wars at the time, just the perfect lead for this. But every dark future cityscape in this thing is kind of the thing that set the stage for any visual like that going forward. And You've got the neon rain scene, the soap dystopia. I'm a sucker for all that. Those kind of vibes probably started for me right here without even knowing it. Deckard, Harrison Ford, Rutger Hauer as Roy, the tears in the rain speech. If you know it, you feel it right now just hearing me say those words. A dying artificial man standing in the rain on a rooftop, delivering one of the greatest monologues in film history. Blade Runner asks questions about consciousness and memory and what it means to be human and mortal versus immortal. It asks people to figure out what was inside this neo-noir sort of detective story with a combination of flying cars and a whole lot of depth. And again, this came out in the same year, the same summer as E.T. and The Thing. This is not a normal year. And then you have a film like Poltergeist. This one is very personal to me because Poltergeist is a film that personally terrified me. I mean, it's in suburbia, it takes a place you're supposed to be safe, and just kind of turns it on its head. And Spielberg producing and basically quasi-directing this film, Tobe Hooper, actually the director on this film, and a haunted house film that understood something most horror films never figure out, and that is that the scariest horror happens not to strangers in strange places, but it happens to the people exactly like you know, in exactly the places that you are familiar and comfortable with. That feeling of that just kind of adds a whole other level to terror that people were not ready for. A nice suburban neighborhood, 2-car garage, kids, a dog, everything. And then the youngest daughter starts to talk to the television. And then the tree. The tree scared me to death when I was a kid. And then the clown. And I need to stop right there because if you were a kid in 1982, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The clown and the tree and the storms. It's responsible for a lot of nightmares, I promise you. That is serious horror cinema right there. And then the words hit. They're here. And it still works over 40 years later. And what gets me as a filmmaker is this movie was made the same year by the same guy who made E.T. So he's on both sides of the same emotional coin here within a 12-month period. And that is extraordinary. And it also happened in 1982. And then you get a film that's continuing a franchise from an old TV show like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And Khan! We know these things, and I have and shall forever be your friend. These big iconic moments from something that had already been around for many years and then was brought and made new and popular again in 1982. Science fiction story. Spock dies to save everyone. The needs of the many outweigh the life of the few. This movie right here is probably one of the most quoted of the franchise. And again, it happened in 1982. 82 had guts. You killed off Spock. That's something real. And then there's no way you talk 1982 without mentioning First Blood. I mean, this is Stallone giving really an Oscar-worthy performance, if nothing else, for the ending scene. He should have been nominated for an acting Oscar for this. Everyone knows Rambo and became this big action franchise, but that's not where it started here in 1982. This one had kind of a real grittiness to it, based on a novel as well. This is one of Stallone's famous best dramatic performances ever, and I'll die on that hill. The scene where he breaks down at the end, that is next level. This is like what he's describing in this is almost horror imagery in this, and he is delivering it raw and honest in a serious prestige drama format of the era. The action in the film still exists, but is in service to the character, which is something that happened less as the films went on. Every trap, every confrontation, everything that happens in the film, you realize it's part of who Rambo is. It comes from everything he's gone through. This is real craft, real filmmaking craft, and it launched one of the most successful franchises in film history, and it started by focusing on something that genuinely mattered. Rambo First Blood is one of my favorite movies of all time. And then came the cable TV miracle. Listen, there's a whole lot more movies, and we're going to talk about some of them. But cable TV and VHS, they played a big part in the success and long-lasting effects of the 1982 films. None more so than The Beastmaster. Now, I've often talked about how much this movie meant to me and my dad and my brother growing up. Hey, Bubba, Beastmaster is on. My dad would watch this thing morning, noon, and night because it was always on. It was on TBS, or also known as the Beastmaster station. Or a little bit later, when you had money, it was on HBO, which stood for Hey, Beastmaster is on. This movie played all the time, and that was when you weren't renting it. So it proved that you didn't have to be a box office phenomenon in 1982. The same way The Thing proved it, the same way Blade Runner proved it, to be a lasting movie that is very important. This was a sword and sorcery adventure done by the crazy Don Coscarelli, who had brought you Phantasm already. It would bring you some much more weird stuff as he went on. But this thing played constantly, weekends, late afternoons, whenever. The TV became a Beastmaster delivery system. And here's what I love about the Beastmaster when you watch it now. It works. It still genuinely works. And that's not something that's easily done for a lot of movies. The practical creature work, practical animals on set, Mark Singer's physical performance, Rip Torn being an evil villain. It's got horror elements to it. It didn't need to be a masterpiece. It just needed to be good enough to have you stop and watch a little bit of it every single time it was on, and I always did. And that is a specific kind of movie magic that is almost completely gone now. The accidental discovery, the film that you found, the film that you discovered. 1982 was absolutely full of them. I would be here for hours trying to name all of them off because it had a deep bench in 1982. When you talk about the bench in 1982, listen, again, I can't be here all day. You get tired of me rattling them off, and you wouldn't believe all the movies that came out in 1982 because we haven't even scratched the surface. You have 48 Hours, Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy in his first big starring role with Walter Hill behind the camera. The film was basically invented what would be used again and again later, the whole buddy cop formula. It started right here. Without 48 Hours, Lethal Weapon, and who knows what else doesn't exist. Beverly Hills Cop probably doesn't exist without 48 Hours. And then you have stuff like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, legendary teen comedy, Amy Heckerling directing a Cameron Crowe script, one of the most honest, human, real, genuine films about teenage life ever made. Sean Penn is Jeff Spicoli, Judge Reinhold in here, Phoebe Cates, the big scene getting out of the pool, Jennifer Jason Leigh in the pool house. This thing just goes on and on and on. And then, of course, how can I not mention Rocky 3? I mean, Stallone had a big year. He had First Blood, he had Rocky 3, where you have Hulk Hogan making his acting debut as Thunder Lips, baby. The ultimate male versus the ultimate meatball. And that launched a whole other part of our pop culture. Professional wrestling, as we know it, started here with Rocky 3, and that was just a side dish in the movie. It was all about Mr. T, who was popular in 1982 for television and things like that. So this, and of course you had Eye of the Tiger, which stands the test of time. And then now, we haven't even got to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Conan the Barbarian. John Milius directing Arnold. Raw, physical, commanding, big, sweeping, epic sword and sorcery. James Earl Jones, a pounding score in this thing. One of the best action film soundtracks ever recorded. Big, sweeping visuals. Arnold's star-making performance before Terminator right here. And then you dip your toe into horror with things like Creepshow, Stephen King, George Romero together on a film that was a love letter to EC Comics. Man, I have to tell you, this one is personal to me if you're new here to the channel, because critics actually compared my film, my horror anthology creature feature to Creepshow and Trick or Treat. It is one of the highlights of my life to have that in major magazine publications. Two of the greatest names in horror, though, working on Creepshow at the peak of their enthusiasm. Everything they clearly loved was in this movie. 1982, a great year for that. We're not even scratching the surface because you got Tron in this year. They're still making Tron sequels to this day. Disney experimenting with computer generated imagery, a whole new visual language at the time. Just became a cult classic instantly with all that. And you have Friday the 13th Part 3 carrying on the franchise. You got Jason Voorhees getting his iconic hockey mask already just a couple years after the first one. And you can't overstate what that meant. Jason is synonymous with that hockey mask now. And that happened in 1982. As did Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Oh man, listen. This movie, I didn't even like this movie when it came out back in the day because there was no Michael Myers. I thought I was getting Michael Myers and I didn't get Michael Myers. But you got Tom Atkins and you got this small town spooky atmosphere. You got the silver shamrock jingle. You had all of that very, very Halloween coded. You got Celtic mythology in here. Tom Atkins doing what he does. And at the time, you didn't get Michael Myers, but this thing has become legendary over time, and it started in 1982. I can't even go over these. You got Dark Crystal, Jim Henson's dark fantasy masterwork, The Last American Virgin in here. You got Canon Films coming on the scene with The Last American Virgin, which was actually a remake of a movie that they had made in Israel at the time, and they came over here. Canon Films did this. This movie is very controversial. It wouldn't hold up in today's ecosystem at all, and it established Canon Films as a force that was going to happen throughout the 80s for sure. And there was a lot of movies there. Again, 1982 was that starting ground. And you had other things like The Road Warrior, 48 Hours, you had Forbidden World, you had Silent Rage, Slumber Party Massacre. The whole VHS horror aisle really began arriving and thriving in 1982 and 1983. No matter what genre you loved, 1982 fed it to you. So why does it still matter? Well, here's the thing I keep coming back to about 1982. These films felt different physically. Film grain, practical effects, real lighting, miniatures, in-camera effects, matte paintings, imperfections, happy accidents. Movies today feel too clean, too often, too digital, too weightless, no weight to them at all, no gravitas, no consequences because the actor's in front of a green screen. But movies from 1982 felt tactile. You felt the worlds that they were creating, and you really knew they were there. They weren't building all this stuff on a green screen. They were having to be on location or building the real sets. And then there's the VHS factor. You didn't just watch these movies once. They lived forever. You could rent them, talk about them, discuss them, and there wasn't millions of other options distracting you. So everyone was on the same page with the monoculture. We shared this sort of thing that we were all into at the same time. If you didn't have the money, maybe eventually you started trying to tape those things off of TV. You memorized scenes, you quoted dialogue with your friends. Everybody knew every single line. These movies became part of people's identities back then in a way that just doesn't happen now. And because there were fewer options, we were more unified, and everyone kind of was on the same page, and everybody kind of had the same excitement, and that feeling is mostly gone now thanks to algorithms catering to your individual taste. You can meet plenty of people that you've seen a movie or TV show you love and they've never even heard of it because they don't have that streaming service, or there's just too many options. But in 1982, movies still felt like events that we all shared. So let me make it plain. 1982 gave us some of the most legendary films in all of movie history. You have a couple of sci-fi legends, horror sci-fi legends in The Thing and Blade Runner that weren't even successes, and they came out the same time as E.T. You had Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, that's a great sci-fi franchise continuing, and there's hardly even room to remember it because there's so many great films. And then you have something genuine like Poltergeist that scared the crap out of generations. The buddy cop formula being introduced with 48 Hours. Stallone with a massive year of First Blood and Rocky 3 that also launched wrestling into the public zeitgeist at the time. Great horror films, things from Forbidden World to Creep Show, and many, many more is just scratching the surface. Friday the 13th, iconic villain being born in his mask, and Conan the Barbarian. More than I could ever mention here from 1982. It gave you that feeling, though. If you were alive and watching movies then or even right after, that cinema that we had was capable of absolutely anything. That any Sunday afternoon, any Saturday night or Friday night could change you. It could change how you looked at the world and movies. You could walk into a movie theater and sit down in front of your television and be somewhere that you had never been. And that feeling, that specific combination of possibility and wonder, combined with a genuine sense that movies mattered and were made by people that loved them, that is something that is so unique, and that is what 1982 gave us. Is it the greatest year in movie history? Well, the verdict is coming because 1977 has an argument. 84 has an argument. 85 has some argument to be worth hearing. 1982, though, it just set the bar so ridiculously high, we had to start there. Is 1982 the greatest year to you, or is there another one? Because we might just get to it. And if you enjoyed this, please hang around. We do all kinds of content like this, lists, movie reviews, and it really helps me out if you hang out because I just love talking movies with you. So you can like and subscribe. If you want to do a little bit more, you can join my Patreon. The link is below. You get your name in lights on every single video. Behind the scenes looks at my own personal filmmaking, physical media, deep dive reviews, members only videos, hanging out with me, and so much more. And I really do appreciate it. But until next time, be kind, rewind like always. It's Chase with AV Pop Culture, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye. I know.